Blessings and greetings, greetings and blessings, blessed souls. We're live because we're blessed to stay alive in Torah Chaim, instructions of life, Torah Chesed, instructions of kindness, Torah Rachamim, instructions of mercies. Today we're going to offer some, what I would consider to be very sobering commentary on the state of affairs that is unfortunately afflicting too many human beings, all blessed and anointed, and they should never be disappointed with the knowledge that they have a tzelem Elokim, a divine image, which relates to his or her human intellect. Today's humble efforts, I've entitled, whatever you want to say, Tragic Occurrences versus Positive Outcome Projections. Now, what had inspired me to offer up these few thoughts for your blessed ears, mind, and hearts was I was listening to a program that was featured in New York City by Mohawk elder and Wiseman, husband, father, and grandfather, John Kane. And John was promoting an event at the Brooklyn Commons in which he would have a featured guest by the name of Cameron Monkman, also known as Young Jibwe, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name right, Mr. Monkman. And he was supposed to make a debut in New York City with his unique form of hip hop, which is a fusion of this genre of hip hop with the inspirations and the stories and instructions to be shared with the rest of the human family experience about the native people's experience, Native American Indians. And this young man, Cameron Monkman, young Jibwe, was on his way from South Dakota and was ready to discuss tough issues that face the people that live in this country who preceded my ancestors. My family came to, as the Native American peoples are called Turtle Island, also known as USA, which I like to call United Soul Unification or Actualization. But this past Sunday, June 19th, his sister committed suicide. There was another suicide that took place on planet Earth, something a little bit closer to home and even more closer to home and to the heart of the members of the Jewish community. For a young woman with a promising life at the tender age of 28, unfortunately and regrettably, jumped off the George Washington Bridge. Her name was Rebecca Wasserstrom. Now, I had debated within myself whether I should reveal her name or not. However, the news of her jumping off the bridge on June 19th, a week ago today, has been publicly broadcast on various websites. It's been published in website periodicals. And her mother described her as a sweet girl, loved and who will be missed. She had many good deeds to take with her. She was a graduate who graduated cum laude, honor student from Brooklyn College in 2010 with a Bachelor of Science in Biology. And she was one of the first students to win a prestigious internship at the Johns Hopkins Hospital called the Stacy Garrow Womack Internship, an experiential program working with oncology doctors according to college records. She was described as someone funny, smart, energetic, and compassionate. And she loved science and helped out at group homes with people suffering from mental and physical disabilities. The mother, and you can only imagine from within the context of a broken heart, described her as a true giver, overflowing with happiness. She loved to make people happy. She wore tutus and fedoras, mismatched socks, just to do anything to bring someone and everyone up. One mourner talked about she was full of energy, light, and compassion. I remember her kindness shining out from her. John Kane, the host of WBAI's talkback, did not really focus on whatever history he probably received from the brother Cameron Monkman, his hip-hop artist, but he chose not to share it. Rather, he talked and he emphasized this idea of intergenerational trauma, which has afflicted the Native American peoples since the Europeans, or as I would more accurately say, more likely than not, the descendants, if not the direct descendants of Edom or Esau, the spiritual, cognitive, or the philosophical students of the Esovian mindset came to these shores and inflicted much damage physically, spiritually, economically, emotionally upon the native populations. And Mr. Kane went on to elaborate on the contemporary level, where young and certainly impressionable native peoples, children, are seeing gross distortions, depictions of their people's culture via the insidious agency of being mascotted, which is perpetrated by colleges and even professional sports teams, most notably the Washington Redskins. And Mr. Kane spoke from issue to issue. He was actually very eclectic in his presentation, but that's also, to me, a very important way of communicating very serious issues. That if we look at the macrocosmic onslaught of how one peoples are brutalized emotionally, physically, economically. Mr. Kane also talked about that too, how the Native Americans had started to experience great success in E-trade until government forces intercepted their efforts and further undermined their economic sovereignty. Now, we in the Jewish community also have a type of intergenerational type of trauma. Will I or can I connect it to this young Rebecca Wasserstrom, may she rest in peace, suicide? I cannot, because I'm talking about my culture, the Jewish culture, the history of how we have been oppressed. In a moment, I'll share this with you because today is actually a significant day in Jewish history in Europe. But if Mr. Kane wants to connect the dots that way, I honor that, because if it is of his people, his history, his people's history, which connects to the whole entire human family experience history, then he is entitled to give the narrative as he sees fit. And one of the things that I'm trying to remember if in this presentation, if he mentioned that he acknowledges that his narrative is not the narrative of all the Native American peoples, but he speaks for himself, and he speaks very accurately and precisely and quite, I should say, with a certain cognitive, emotional zealousness. So I applaud him for doing that. What I would like to share with you, blessed, is that how we of the Jewish people have also experienced intergenerational or cross-generational trauma, which goes back hundreds of years, just as the Native American peoples of Turtle Island, aka the USA Unified Soul Actualization, have experienced. And I'd like to go back to when there were already problems here on Turtle Island in the Americas, North America precisely, paralleling what already the native peoples were experiencing here in America was taking place under the Polish rule. In Europe, I guess you could call that Eastern Europe. And I'm quoting here from the Jewish Timeline Encyclopedia, which was compendium of history, basically going back to original man and woman to basically about 1991, which was put together, written by Rabbi Matis Cantor, who I believe is a Rav who lives in Muncie, New York. And I'm telling you, I'm even show you the book. You can see it clearly. It's a book worthy of your purchase, which you probably can get it online. So going back to 1648, there were a group of human beings who wreaked historically great damage upon the Jewish people, anyone who opposed them. They were known as the Cossacks. At that time, they rebelled against the Polish rule, which was then under the leadership of a Bogdan Khmelnytsky. And I don't think I'm pronouncing his name right. I'll spell it out for you, the first name and the second, and then you can Google up and learn more about it yourself if you're interested. Bogdan, and the last name is Chmielnitzki, who had gained from some military assistance from the Tatar rules of Crimea, and they attempted to establish an independent Ukraine. So we see this issue of the independence in the Ukrainian area has been an issue for at least the past 368 years. However, when these Cossacks, with their assistance from the Tatar rules of Crimea, when they could, these rebellious forces attacked the Jews. They tortured many and forcibly converted some, massacred tens of thousands, and mutilated their remains. 300 Jewish communities were destroyed. We're talking about 1648. And Rav Cantor cites between 100 and 300,000 Jews were killed in the massacres, which are known as the Gezerot Tachvatat, for the years 5408 and 5409. Now, that's not the English solar calendar, that's the Hebrew lunar calendar, which 5408 and 5409 were the successive years since original stewards of earth, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, lived upon this earth. And yet Poland and Lithuania had been a haven for the Jewish people for many years. Unfortunately, it became a scene of massive Jewish devastation. On the 20th of Sivan, which is today's date, out of Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, on the Hebrew lunar calendar date, now we're 5,776 years since then, the original stewardship of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. 6,000 Jews of Nimera, Poland, were killed. And that day was later declared a fast day. In fact, one of the congregants where I pray here in Kesser Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York, Rav Yosef Yitzhak Gaisinski, pointed out to me, even before I looked up this documented occurrence, is that there are certain types of Hasidim that today will fast, even though generally speaking, we do not fast on the day following Shabbat. Then 1,000 Jews were tortured and killed then on the 4th of Tammuz, which would correspond to about 2 weeks from today. A little less, a little more. And then, in about a month and a half from now, historically speaking, in the year 1648, there were 3,000 Jews who were killed in Starokonstanów in Poland on Tisha B'Av. Further, during this summer, 368 years ago, 12,000 Jews in Naryn, Poland were drowned, killed in a synagogue which was set on fire. Actually, this took place in the early fall, the 17th of Cheshvan, that's the Hebrew lunar calendar month following the joyous month of Tishrei. And there were 40,000 Jews who had left from other parts of the country seeking refuge in the vicinity of Naral, but they were massacred as well. So the fact that there are certain Jewish groups, although not in my community, that will fast today, that we still will engage in pensive reflections based on the massacres of yesteryears, just as the anniversary, the dates of the massacre at Wounded Knee, which I was quite disturbed, unfortunately, when government officials in this country right now said that that horrible occurrence in Orlando, Florida, 2 weeks ago, was considered to be the greatest single-handed massacre in the history of the United States, when anyone just doing a little historical research will realize, and John Kane brought this out, not in this broadcast, but in previous broadcasts, and even non-Native American peoples, people of European background have brought out that the worst massacre in any single one day was on Wounded Knee. So where do we go with all this information, blessed souls? Well, we can do the research, we can get extremely bitter, or perhaps from these historical and even contemporary occurrences of self-injurious behavior leading to the taking of one's precious life, or the massacre that took place in Orlando, Florida. For those of us who are still standing with the blessings of the Most High in the land of the living, what can we do to act as proper human stewards upon this earth? Perhaps we can take time to reflect, and some can interpret my reflection as philosophical, theological, spiritual, or even mental health oriented. I would first of all humbly suggest that we take a moment to be grateful of this precious gift that we have called life. And why we are not able to evidence all of the blessings, meaning to accurately describe how wondrous, although there's science and biology, and I guess you can even get involved in quantum physics, the fact that we can just breathe freely, those of us who can have free respiration, the very fact that we can open our eyes and our ears. We have a saying in the Hebrew, Ezehu Ashir, who is a wise man? And that word Ashir is consisting of 4 Hebrew letters, Ayin, Shin, Yud, Resh. Ayin for Aznayim, ears. Actually, I say for Anayim. Yud for Yadayim, for hands. Shin for Shinayim, teeth. And Resh for Raglayim. Now, the ears are not mentioned, but of course, we're also very fortunate when we shouldn't take for granted our right earlobe and our left earlobe, and where it connects to our cognitive, spiritual, emotional functioning. Ad kedei kach, there is a type of spiritual power which was identified by a very great Chosid, pious man, teacher, Rav, Makubal, Tzaddik, righteous soul, Rav Hilmei Parch, who talked about the spiritual power within the human ear to differentiate between truth and that which is the opposite of truth, good, and that which is the opposite of goodness. For those people who have taken their lives, unfortunately, we can't bring them back. I guess for the social workers and the therapists and for the families of the relatives and the friends, there will be probably at some point after whatever particular mourning period they follow according to their people's customs, or in this case, in the Jewish community or the Native American community, they'll probably want to learn more. And for whatever reason, although it might not take away the pain of the loss of their loved ones, hopefully it can serve as a means of educating other ones who are connected to other people, who experience what is known as some sort of ideation, meaning they are projecting out their ideas to other people that they wish to engage in self-injurious behavior, ad kidei kach, as we say, up until the point where they actually want to take their life and they have a plan. At that point, as someone who is involved in the mental health field, once a person, he or she or he, or whatever gender type they identify with, if it's somewhere in between the he or she modality, species, whatever you want to say, once they can particularize a plan of how they would hurt themselves, then it's a very wise investment of one's time and effort to take that person for some sort of evaluation. Well, as well, I think I have a number here that one can call, which should be culturally friendly to all peoples. It's known as the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which one can call at 800-273-TALK or 800-273-8255. And one of the things that John Kane brought up during his broadcast is that while, yes, such an opportunity does exist for the person who's in crisis to reach out to these helplines, which for sure have prevented people from engaging in self-injurious behavior ad kidei kach until the point they take their lives. Still, for the person calling in who is in crisis, how hard it must be to speak to someone he or she does not know. And when they're offered advice where they can go for help, sometimes the advice or the assistance or the support they need is not available for a day or two. It could be for the next weekend, or even, I would even suggest even further, although probably more likely than not, those offering the advice on the other side of the 800 call number for those people in such a crisis, potential crisis, can offer them something with more immediate help. But what about us? What are us people who, thus it's also, we sometimes have a bad day and we say, oh, do I need to continue? But we don't go any further than that. I think every one of us had that thought. But because we have what to live for, whether it be as society would understand it, or we're just self-motivated to feel that we should keep on persevering during this wonderful life experience, and as sometimes as it may bitter as it may seem, what can we do? Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to add to this perspective, which I would have not offered a solution of preventing this young Native American woman, or even Rebecca Wasserstrom, from committing suicide, but to talk about the idea of positive outcome projections. Now, positive outcome projections is not something that you will find in any psychology book as far as I know. Basically, it's something that I spun out of my own mind, for good or worse, or somewhere in between. This idea of us coming to recognize, and again, this is not even my own original idea, what I'm leading this conversation to, is that we would be well advised to first bring it within our own particular life standing or experience, to make some time during the week, and for those who are quite energetic, I would say, to even on a daily basis, review, and the time that it would take you to review this would be, it could be a second, it could be a minute, it could be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to review your virtues and to review your shortcomings, and to immerse yourself in knowing yourself. And if you have trouble in deciphering who you are in terms of your role in this world, yes, you can go to mentors, wise men, wise women, people of tremendous profound consciousness, and that will be up to you to decide who those people are and seek their advice. But again, you can go to the wisest man or the wisest woman in the world, but still, as much as they can know you, as much as they can help you, more likely than not, this wise woman or this wise man will advise you that you have to take some sort of action. And the process of thinking who you are, who we are as human beings, being human, stewards of this blessed earth, should render for you more positive perceptions, more positive potential outcomes when you think about the fact that, first of all, there has to be a pretty good reason why you're here on earth. You may want to examine that reason through the prism of your culture, and I encourage you to do so, as I do that within my own culture, meaning the Jewish, Israelite, Hebrew, Mosaic perspective. Those are the, so to speak, particularized sunglasses or earphones that I put into my cognitive, spiritual, emotional ears, or the visors that guide me as I deal with the outside world, outside of my own community here in Kesser Crown Heights. And once this becomes a part of your lifestyle, you should be surprised if you make certain changes which are more life-affirming. Now, this will not necessarily empower you or give you the right to get on a soapbox to speak to other people, but if you exemplify wellness, if you exemplify your belief in your own potentially positive outcomes, people will seek your advice. People will look to you as an example, not necessarily as a leader, because unfortunately we have a leadership crisis in this world as well. And look where, whether it be in England, or in Africa, here in the Americas, in Asia. So the type of movement that we are talking about, we of the Jewish people are talking about, is that, or at least I am, so I'm not going to assume that I'm speaking for all Jewish people. I think that'd be a little bit precocious on my part. But from teachings that I've learned from Hasidus in the last 30 years, is the moment you can recognize a virtue in yourself and you can internalize it and exemplify it for others. Sometimes it will be in a overt way, sometimes in a covert way, sometimes you'll exemplify something from someone that later on they will tell you that you did something good by just being there and not necessarily talking to them. Not that this is the solution to prevent suicide, but it's one of the subject matters which I hope will become more and more prevalent when placed upon the human table of peaceful and pleasant dialogue. Your own life is your own laboratory. Another person's life is another world. As the sages of Israel have taught, if you can save a life, you can save a world. Yes, your life is a world too, but what we have to do in our world is our personal obligation. How much we want to help other people is also an obligation that falls upon us. But again, most of us will be looking, if not all of us, we look to our personal cultural perspective of how much can we help? How much can we not help? To give you a cultural perspective, yesterday I was looking in a teaching from the Zohar, the Book of Light, the Book of Shining, which was authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived over 1800 years ago in the land of Israel. And he talked about the times preceding the universal redemption, and it really fits into these times. He talked about a great poverty that will sweep all over the earth amongst the Jewish people, because we'll be lacking, not necessarily economically. I know in America there are, the statistics I've seen consistently over the last couple of years, believe it or not, there's at least 500,000 Jews here in America living in poverty. Now, that's a high percentage given the fact that we are a bona fide minority amongst the various peoples that live here on Turtle Island, aka the USA, Unified Soul Actualization. The type of poverty that Rabbi Shimon had predicted, which would manifest, would be the poverty of knowledge of the Creator's teachings. And I would humbly suggest this is also part of the problem which is plaguing the human family experience, whether it be the children of Israel or the blessed nations of the earth, which we humbly point out that this is our tradition, that all peoples are related back from 70 root families who emanated out of 3 sons and their 3 wives from that ancient ark over 4,100 years ago. Now again, it is your right, whoever you may be, whether you be of the Jewish nation or any other nation upon the earth. I think there's over 170, according to the UN designation of peoples and nations, to decide what is that within your own particular peoples. What is your people lacking? Yes, some are simply lacking economically, but if we're honest with ourselves, most of our peoples, no matter what nation we are part of, are lacking in knowledge of a higher wisdom. And I don't take myself out of that category. I've acquired some, but there's much more that I haven't acquired. It's a humbling reality, but it's also a motivating factor for myself, personally, as one of the 7 billion inhabitants upon this blessed planet Earth that the Creator gave to us so lovingly, so freely. We didn't need a social security card to have the world created and us manifest out. We didn't need an IRA account. We didn't need to trade in some sort of goods and services. We're here. We have made it harder upon ourselves because of the lack of the knowledge of the teachings. Whether you want to call it the lessons that can be learned from quote unquote the earth, Mother Nature, the Father Moon, or we would say of the prophets, up leading back to Moses among our people and the prophets before Moses, because there were plenty of prophets before Moses, and there were plenty of prophets after Moses, and there have been prophets of the nations as well. Wise people, mystics, sages, healers of soul, healers of intellect, healers of emotional instability, emotional staticity instead of emotional plasticity. Yeah, they exist today too. Personally, I think John Kane is one of them for his people, but he carries within himself a burning desire to, within his native knowledge of himself and of his people and this land that we live upon, to spread it universally in a very intense, yet, but I think also very dedicated and wholesome fashion. Yeah, I don't agree with everything what he says, but that's okay, because what we disagree upon are such minute matters that it's not of consequence to me, and that's why I listen to his program, and especially as we get back to what we began talking about, the idea of suicide, the unfortunate tragic event where a person feels so locked in a box, they feel they can't get out of it, and somehow death is the solution. We think out loud, blessed souls, that there's another teaching of Rashbi, which also could bring a lot of healing. It is culturally specific to the Jewish people. And we talked about the idea before the coming of the Messiah, the Mashiach, that many well-to-do Jewish businessmen, and even could be considered in the category of philanthropists, will lack in their support of those who engage deeply, and I mean very deeply, into Torah teachings and can instruct the masses of Jewish people and also the masses of human beings as it relates to their 7 universal commandments, the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach. But these wealthy philanthropists feel that they cannot give more than they can, but yet from a more objective perspective, they're not giving enough. And if they were to give more, it wouldn't even begin to touch that which is considered their essential economic stability. Meaning, let's say if a person For example, and this is again, an imaginary example, but one can extrapolate it from this more real life scenarios. If one has lived a certain amount of years upon this earth and knows this to be true, let's say a person is a billionaire. So they give about $1 million a year, even $2 million a year, 3 or 4, $5 million a year. Well, that's nice. Their assets are 1 billion, and they give $5 million a year. But if you were to take away, say, their expenses, say, let's say 200 million or 300 million or even 500 million, such expenses that exist in this example, that means they have $500 million of assets which is not touched by their expenses or the taxations that they must endure from the government. So they give 5 million. So they're only giving 1% of their assets after their yearly expenses. Now, from the Torah, from the oral Torah tradition, much more is expected of someone, even when they're not a billionaire, even when they're not a person who has $100 million in assets. There's a blank, open requirement for a person to give a certain amount from a biblical commandment from their field. The original tithing is from agricultural produce, although most of us do not live on farms. And therefore, from the oral Torah tradition, the rabbis have advised us and enjoined us to give based on our circumstances. In some cases, as much as we can. In other cases, up to 20%. And even certain individuals, such as the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, suggested in order to make repairs and tikkunim, rectifications in our souls, just as a person would, so to speak, break through all limitations to access medical healings for whatever is ailing them, so too in spiritual matters, if they have blemished themselves, which from a cultural perspective within our Judaic, Mosaic teachings, that's what happens when a person is not going in the way of the Creator. They create blemishes upon their soul, and sometimes it manifests on their body as well. So they can give much more than even that 20% of that money which they can set aside to give for charity. So the Rashbi, going back to this teaching from Rashbi, the complaint of these wealthy philanthropist Jews, and this applies to all people as well, but so is that they cannot afford to support these scholars with more because they're getting heavily taxed. He doesn't say, but it's implied they're getting heavily taxed by the local, let's extrapolate from the local or the city or the state or the federal authorities. So the Rashbi says this: if you would support those Torah scholars properly, a new sequence of events would manifest that we wouldn't be surprised that you'd be paying less taxes to those other outside agencies on a local, city, state, and federal level. We were advised, as part of the human family experience, from the Lubavitch Rebbe when he was approached by a CNN reporter. So what can we do in order to participate? I'm paraphrasing now. You can see the video yourself. It's on the internet. To jumpstart, to accelerate this process of redemption, universal redemption, with the coming of the Mashiach, the Messiah. And the Rebbe said, very simply, increase in acts of kindness. If we are a culture that is based on unadulterated kindness, and with that kindness, hopefully be safer upon Yafos, with a cheery and bright countenance, one to the other. And that includes as well a type of spiritual tzedakah ruchni, meaning to help a person who seems in distress. Now, one of the things that you can do to identify a person, blessed souls, who is in distress is he or she starts to manifest behaviors of isolation, self-isolation, spending more time that they normally would in their homes or their apartments, or saying they need to go to some sort of retreat, whether it be to the woods, forest, the local park, to the lake, to the beach, to the sea, wherever it may be, but they're doing it alone. They're not doing it with anyone else. Yes, there is an approach in Avodas HaKodesh in our holy service as Jewish people called this Bodedut, which it is a long time practice among our people and a part of our culture. From a Torah perspective, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the tzaddik from the Ukraine, had taught us this is a very healthy thing to do. But the whole intent of Rabbi Nachman's presentation of his Bodedut, of isolating oneself, was to recharge oneself, to get back into this stage of human interaction, not to withdraw for the sake of getting further immersed in withdrawing ourselves from interacting with other people. So I guess on that note, we're going to end this very impromptu broadcast. Again, if I had called into John Kane's program, I probably would not have been given all this time, but I guess because I've taken the liberty to make this broadcast, I hope to post it to his Let's Talk Facebook page, that it will spur some thought amongst those people who might want to watch it. I'll post it on my Facebook page. And hopefully this will encourage, again, I don't think I brought these solutions to these issues preventing suicide or tragic occurrences. But hopefully, if I can stimulate any one of you who are going to be watching this archived version, because I gave very little prompts to any of my friends to watch it on a live basis. But when you see this archive version, if this will prompt you to do a little research into the matter, and at least take out the practical, achievable outcome of assessing yourself, your virtues and your shortcomings, and you'll see that you are much more tipping on the side of the scale of your own self-assessment. You have many more virtues than lackings. That you'll work on strengthening those virtues. Where you'll have to deal with your negative points, you'll have to deal with it. But again, if you will emphasize that which is good about you, there's more good about you than not. That's why you're alive. You're given this chance, and you have the freedom of will, the bechira chavshis, to actualize yourself. You'll find that you may not just enrich the quality of your life, you might actually have the great schus, the great merit of actually physically, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually help save one's life. And that can have an intergenerational effect. That person, instead of taking their life, goes on to get married, to become a productive, contributing member to society, or is already married and makes a roundabout turn and improves the relationship. And if they're a parent, their parenting will be much more upgradable, much more tangibly observable. Something has changed them. And again, changes are not always necessarily going to be linear positive steps, but they can go straight forward, they can go from side to side, they can go back and forth, they can involve nephilos and aliyos, falling and going up. But overall, a person has a sense of they can go further. How good and pleasant it will be our portion to be the instigators of other people going further, no matter from where they come from. Because no matter where we all come from, one reality which we of Israel will continue to promote is that it may manifest in a way of ahava echad, one love, gorel echad, one destiny, l'kolam, for all of us, v'dar chinon, v'dar kishon, in a pleasant and peaceful way, with the imminent arrival, Mashiach Tzidkenu, of our righteous Messiah, the anointed one, prophet, king, teacher, who will roar out Torah Chadashah, viewpoints of divine teachings which have never been revealed, even to the greatest of our prophets, of our people, or of the nations of the world. To be continued with the help of the Most High. And I bid you adieu. Take care.